And in order to receive the dollars that you've been granted, you have to hit these matrix. And these matrix bring it right back to ethnic and racial disparities. So this money is what I would call woke.
Welcome back to Searchlight Report, a podcast from South Dakota Searchlight. I'm Meghan O'Brien, and our podcast brings you up to date on policy and politics in the Mount Rushmore state. This week, we're talking about the potential for large data centers in the state, who has to pay when power lines spark wildfires, how Governor Larry Roden views Kristi Noem, and a resolution that divided South Dakota lawmakers over religion. But first, you just heard from Republican State Representative Julie Auk of Lesterville. She spoke in opposition to a pretrial monitoring program during a debate in the state house. The state's Chief Justice Stephen Jensen requested the bill. It would create a pilot program to monitor people who are released on bond. Court service officers would help make sure people don't miss court dates. The pilot program would run in Pennington County for a year. The Unified Judicial System had a grant of $385,000 for the project from the MacArthur Foundation in Chicago. When the bill came to the state house floor, several lawmakers, like Auk, described the foundation as too liberal for South Dakota.
The foundation is particularly concerned about the increases in the jail population and racial and ethnic disparities. They were obsessively focused on a single metric. Where it concerns me is who basically gives the city and the county the authority to spend the money. From what I'm reading from the contract, is it definitely comes from the foundation. And in order to receive the dollars that you've been granted, you have to hit these matrix. And these matrix bring it right back to ethnic and racial disparities. So this money is what I would call woke. This MacArthur organization is obviously wanting us to offer liberty and justice for some, but not for all.
Representative Kaden Whitman, a Democrat from Sioux Falls, told lawmakers there are racial disparities in the state's incarcerated population. She's also the chair of South Dakota's Correction Commission.
More than 50% of our incarcerated women are Indigenous, and more than 30% of our incarcerated men are Indigenous, while they only make up 8% of our state's population. So clearly those discrepancies are already occurring. I've heard a concern on this floor today that we maybe don't have a very high success rate for pretrial services, but I would like to add a caveat that may depend on how we are choosing to define success when participating in this particular program, because that statistic can often be based on a very narrow definition of success, like no new charges and no failures to appear and no technical violations, which is really important. Those are important things that we need to measure. But we also need to gather data around how these folks are maintaining employment, if they're staying connected or reconnecting with families, accessing treatment or services. Those are all extraordinarily critical components when it comes to reducing long-term system involvement. And I think that this pilot program will actually offer us the chance to gather our own South Dakota-specific data so that we are not pulling from other states when we're making some of these decisions.
The House rejected the bill with 34 votes against authorizing the grant spending and 33 for it. Data centers are spreading across the country, but not so much in South Dakota. Pending legislation could change that. I sat down with Searchlight's Makenzie Huber, who's been investigating how data centers could affect South Dakota. She worked with Searchlight reporter Joshua Heyer to develop a 4-part series that's available to read at southdakota.searchlight.com. I'll start and just have you introduce yourself to our audience.
My name is Makenzie Huber. I'm a politics and public policy reporter for South Dakota Searchlight.
And just to start, tell me a little bit about what really sparked your interest in diving a little bit deeper into reporting on data centers.
Yeah, so I think what really got me interested in reporting on data centers this year was hearing a lot about it on assignments. I would hear it from congressional delegates and lawmakers this summer, but I would also see it pop up on my social media, and I would hear neighbors mention it when I was just walking and talking to people in my neighborhood. And so it was definitely a topic that interested others and something that I wanted to learn and understand better, because it appeared like it would be a topic that I should know heading into legislative session and for my job as a journalist.
And so give me just a little bit of an overview of what's kind of come out of this reporting.
Yeah, so the series looks at data centers in South Dakota, the lack thereof right now, but also the potential future of data centers coming to South Dakota. So it covers, it hints at the legislative discussion that we're going to have surrounding tax incentives for data centers, the potential consequences and benefits of data centers in the state. But it also takes a look at communities that have been impacted by data centers, whether that is in South Dakota. We do have a community that has a 30 megawatt data center in South Dakota, but also a community in North Dakota that has been impacted as well. And then from there, we really explore what the future looks like, where if we have data centers in South Dakota, which use a lot of energy, as we know from data centers being built across the country, what does that look like for South Dakota energy-wise? Will we be looking at nuclear energy? Will we be looking at more renewables? What needs to be in place to protect South Dakotans and ratepayers if we're going to have this in the state?
And I mean, with the legislative session kind of getting into full swing, there's a lot of talk about property tax, economic development, and some concern for natural resources like water and what kind of infrastructure is needed for that. How do data centers play a role in all of the topics that are being discussed in the legislature this year?
Yeah, so I guess specifically for data centers, there are two topics where data centers come to mind. One of them is tax incentives. We're going to be hearing about a bill this legislative session to provide tax incentives specifically for data centers, so they wouldn't have to pay sales and use tax for equipment upgrades. That is something that is in other states where they have data centers, and something where companies that want to build data centers in South Dakota say that they won't build in South Dakota unless this tax incentive is in place. Some opponents question that and what the impact would be on South Dakota if we took away that sales tax. So there'll be that discussion about the potential benefits and consequences of that. And at the same time, as we all know, property taxes are a huge thing this session, a huge topic of discussion. And so property taxes, where this fits into property taxes is that if you have a new entity come into a community and builds there are taxes that come along with that. Property taxes that they pay, the sales taxes, like I mentioned, that could be paid or not paid depending on the incentive, and other consumption taxes or energy-related taxes, all of which expand or grow the tax base, which would, in theory, or what supporters say, would relieve property taxes for South Dakotans or people in a local community. Property taxes, but also the other taxes that are given to schools and counties. So those are tax incentives, and property taxes are where I see data centers being brought up the most, because that's where it'll have the largest impact on the largest amount of South Dakotans.
Since my conversation with Makenzie, Republican Senator Taffy Howard of Rapid City filed 2 bills related to data centers. The first is aimed at limiting the noise pollution from the centers, and the second would label them as large-use customers and require electric rates that would protect other customers from increases, among other regulations. The Public Utilities Commission is supporting legislation that would require data centers to pay for the Commission's assessments on larger projects.
South Dakota journalism is changing. Traditional, corporate-owned media outlets have reduced their staffs. Newspapers have lost pages and publication days. That's why South Dakota Searchlight shares its work with other outlets for free. We hope local outlets republish our statewide news and commentary, and we hope that frees them up to focus on their community. That means you might see our work at SouthDakotaSearchlight.com, in your local paper, on the website of your local TV station, or even on the airwaves of your local radio station. All of that is possible with your support to our nonprofit mission. You can help at SouthDakotaSearchlight.com/donate.
When broken power lines start wildfires, damages to property can spark lawsuits. Senator Steve Kolbeck, a Republican from Brandon, introduced a bill that would give utilities legal protections if they're found responsible for wildfires. Kolbeck is also the director of business affairs for Xcel Energy, a utility with thousands of South Dakota customers.
What happens is one group would maybe think that $650 million is enough, and one group thinks that $1 billion is enough. So when you talk numbers like that, you talk about bankrupting companies. That's a true fear. And then the other thing is, and it's kind of ironic, but insurance premiums, because of those lawsuits, go up. Because then you're going to pay more money, and ratepayers are going to pay more money because of those lawsuits. We just need to put some bumpers around it. We're going to pay. We're going to decide how much we're going to pay. We want to make people whole. We just don't want to make them rich.
But trial lawyers and insurance representatives say the proposal shifts the cost of wildfire losses from utilities onto property owners and their insurers. Steve Siegel represents the South Dakota Trial Lawyers Association.
Under this bill, the average South Dakotan would not be made whole. Punitive damages would be non-existent. That's not good because punitive damages are a good inducement and a good hammer for these utilities to keep them in line. It makes them do what they need to do to prevent fires. And it shifts the burden to insurance companies. And the utilities don't pay any premiums to the insurance companies. So the insurance companies, the homeowners insurance companies, bear the brunt of it, and they're not receiving any benefit from the utilities. Fire victims may not recover non-economic damages unless the plaintiff suffered death or visible body injury in the form of a burn. No smoke inhalation, burned lungs. I'd like to know, what is the definition of visible bodily injury? Is that with the naked eye? Does that include an MRI scan or a CAT scan? There's no definition of visible bodily injury. What is it?
The bill passed the state Senate with only 4 no votes. It'll need to pass through the House of Representatives next. Former South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem is in headlines throughout the country this week. She's now the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security. She sparked outrage with her comments during a press conference after federal agents working for her department shot and killed 37-year-old Alex Preddy in Minneapolis.
This individual went and impeded their law enforcement operations, attacked those officers, had a weapon on him, and dozens of rounds of ammunition, wishing to inflict harm on these officers, brandishing like that and impeding their work that they were doing. That is no claim. It is the facts. The facts of this situation. This individual showed up to a law enforcement operation with a weapon and dozens of rounds of ammunition. He wasn't there to peacefully protest. He was there to perpetuate violence. When you perpetuate violence against a government because of ideological reasons and for reasons to resist and perpetuate violence, that is the definition of domestic terrorism. This individual who came with weapons and ammunition to stop a law enforcement operation of federal law enforcement officers committed an act of domestic terrorism. That's the facts.
Videos of the shooting show Preddy holding a cell phone and helping a woman who agents appeared to push to the ground. 8 agents then wrestled Preddy to the ground. Videos also appear to show an agent removing a handgun from Preddy, but the videos do not show Preddy trying to use the gun against the agents. He had a permit to carry the gun. More than 3/4 of U.S. House Democrats are supporting a motion to impeach Noem. Support for the resolution began growing after the earlier fatal shooting of 37-year-old Renee Good in Minneapolis, also by a federal agent working for Noem's department. Noem and the Trump administration have had thousands of immigration officers carrying out operations in Minnesota for weeks. At a press conference this week in Pierre, a reporter asked South Dakota Governor Larry Roden if he still supports his predecessor.
My position has not changed, and it was encouraging to me because I know that she's been getting a lot of press, and it was encouraging to me to hear that President Trump has, first of all, has taken steps to kind of lower the temperature and open a line of communication, and that's encouraging. I think that needed to happen, but he also stood firm with his support of Kristi Noem, and I'm in the same place. My opinion of her has not changed. I've watched her. We text occasionally. I've tried to encourage her because I know she's got a tough job, and I still think she's up to the task.
Another reporter asked if Roden wanted to comment on the death of Alex Preddy.
I don't.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you being here.
Let me just clarify a little bit with that. I don't have a comment because I don't know the details. I'm not privy to the details. We know for a fact that he had a loaded firearm with him. Whether he was legal or not, I've never heard. When they were saying that before it was even being investigated. So I never got confirmation that was in fact the truth. But whether it was or wasn't, there's all kinds of information that I am not aware of. So why would I make a comment basing my opinion with no grounding in fact? And I think that's a big part of the problem that we face in some of these issues is people jumping to conclusions and then standing their ground and making absurd statements based on conjecture. You owe it as a public official, you owe it to the public, and you owe it to yourself and your own moral conscience to know for a fact that what you're speaking is the truth before you speak it.
Hi, it's Moses Eshet, Product Associate at States Newsroom. At States Newsroom, we have more than 200 reporters and editors working for you. Our journalists are located in all 50 state capitals and Washington, D.C., providing state-focused news coverage about the issues that matter most to you and your community. You can support our work by going to statesnewsroom.com/subscribe.
Finally, state lawmakers this week approved a resolution asking South Dakotans to, quote, seek the Lord Most High for his healing presence and mercy, unquote. It passed 22-11 in the Senate and 42-23 in the House. Michaela Voida, a Republican from Bone Steel, introduced it to her fellow state senators.
I have a vision for South Dakota that I want to share with each and every one of you. Serving in the Appropriations Committee, we get to hear all of the hardships, the injustices, and the corruption, and all the other issues of our state. And we see how much money we throw at them. Certain things like agendas that turn us away from a rightly loving God and loving our neighbors. Decisions by the federal government that threaten our institutions and our way of life. Things like corruption in all levels of government. Criminal violence in our communities. Human trafficking, which is an abhorrent evil in this whole country. addiction and mental illness that we see overwhelming our state resources and our communities and our families, divorce rates, and unending extensive demand for foster care. It indicates a fundamental brokenness in our society.
In the House, Republican Representative Tony Randolph of Rapid City gave his sponsoring remarks.
It's not uncommon, if you will, on the early, or I should say maybe wasn't uncommon, on the early stages of this nation, where our founders, the leaders of this nation, would call on the people when we were in times of distress. Most of the time they would do it then was fasting and praying. We were dealing with wars, both internal and external. And they recognized that in order for them to prevail, they needed his help. Right now, I believe, as well as many others, that we are in that same condition.
Some opponents to the resolution worried how it conflicts with the First Amendment. That includes Representative Mike Weisgram, a Republican from Fort Pierre.
Religious liberty is guaranteed to us to practice or not to practice. Yet a House concurrent resolution acts as a formal statement of policy.
Republican Representative Phil Jensen of Rapid City said it was shocking there was even a debate over approving the resolution.
And I can't help but imagine that our founding fathers would be rolling over in their grave at the fact that we're even having to debate this. This should be a no-brainer. And I would venture to say the only ones that are going to be voting red up there are going to be Democrats. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative.
There were votes against the resolution from Democrats and Republicans in each chamber. Though no Democrats spoke during the House debate, Sioux Falls Democratic Representative Eric Muckey spoke with South Dakota Searchlight.
We as a government entity have a responsibility to preserve religion and the practice of that. And I don't think that resolution reflects that, and I'm disappointed in our chamber for doing so.
Muckey also responded to Jensen's comments, saying they were, quote, beyond the pale, unquote. That's all we have for this week on Searchlight Report. The podcast is based on reporting by South Dakota Searchlight's staff, editor Seth Tupper, senior reporter John Holt, and reporters Joshua Heyer, Makenzie Huber, and me. I write the scripts and produce the audio with editing by Seth Tupper. Audio this week came from recordings by South Dakota Searchlight, legislative live streams provided by South Dakota Public Broadcasting, and from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. South Dakota Searchlight is part of States Newsroom, the nation's largest nonprofit news organization. Until next time, I'm South Dakota Searchlight's Meghan O'Brien with the Searchlight Report.